Minding Your Business, the show for entrepreneurs. I'm your host, June Middleton. This evening's show is really a fascinating one. It features a painter and two book authors. They have written a really interesting book, and our painter has made very interesting paintings, all about the city of New York, primarily. And the very talented painter is Anna Marie Trombetta, and the amazing and fascinating authors are Nelson Velez and McInnis. Welcome to the show. It's just so much fun to have you here because you all have experienced the city, some similarities, some differences, and we're going to talk a bit on that. Because you're entrepreneurs, you have interesting experiences to share with us, and we will get to them. But Anna-Marie, let's start with you.
Okay.
And when did you first realize that you wanted to paint as a career?
Oh, I think it was in my teenage years, but in my early youth, I would always doodle and play with crayons all by myself, very quiet.
Did you color outside of the outline, or was the creative part that started coming through?
I'm sure I did both ways, knowing myself, and then also chalks were a very big influence. Drawing on the street.
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
So.
Absolutely. The games that we used to play, playing, drawing on the street with chalk.
Right.
But what, did you train here in New York primarily?
Yes, most of my training has been almost every art school in the city. I started off at the Brooklyn Museum in my teenage years before I finished high school, and then I went to Parsons School of Design, which is downtown.
Yeah, we've had many guests from Parsons on the show.
Yeah, it was a great school. And also, along with that, they were affiliated with the New School. So I had my art classes in one building, and the New School was a very innovative, a lot of the intellectuals that fled from Europe founded that school, so it was a nice mixture. And then from there I went on to a very new school, it's about maybe 20, 25 years old, called the New York Academy.
In Manhattan? In
Manhattan. It was predominantly for figurative drawing, painting, sculpture. We took anatomy classes.
So then you had a lot of live models?
A lot of live models and a couple of non-live models. So we did...
Cadavers?
Cadavers, yeah.
You're kidding.
No, that was actually...
Fascinating.
Extremely.
Oh my gosh.
Because I was actually thinking of going into medicine before I decided to become an artist. So for whatever reason, I took to it. I didn't get squeamish or scared or, a little nauseated. No, I was fine with it. I think now I would be, but back then, no.
I had thought of becoming a surgeon until I saw the blood, and then I changed my mind. I said, law is better. It's a different kind of blood.
Yeah. Nice color, though. Blood has a very rich, depending on whose blood it is.
What I'd like to do,
Not that I know, though.
Why don't we look at some of your images, some of your paintings, because you have some really fascinating works that you brought
Thank you.
For us. And I know that you did the gates in what I call the curtains.
The curtains, yeah.
in Central Park.
One of the reasons why I did that is because I had an opportunity to meet Christo and Jean-Claude. They had an exhibition at the National Academy prior to the gates opening up. And there was just something about the color and the vibrancy. And also the way it transformed the park, because usually in the wintertime it is just so, well, it's not as lively as it is in the summertime, but it was a challenge to work under all those different weather conditions, I must say. I mean, there's a picture of me, I look like the Incredible Hulk's orange girlfriend. Yeah, my back is...
a photograph of you actually painting with the painting.
Yeah, I like to do most of my work from life.
Now, we have another one, if you'll describe this to us. It's a snow scene?
Yes, that was actually done from inside the castle in Central Park.
The Belvedere?
Belvedere Castle, that is
Aha.
correct. Yeah,
How did you get into the Belvedere Castle
Well,
to look
it
out
just-
onto Central Park?
Yeah, it just happened to be the right time of year. It was fairly quiet, and I befriended somebody that worked there, and I showed him my work. I asked, and I was able to do it, and it was great. I was inside with my little easel looking out, nice and warm, and there it was in all its splendor, the winter wonderland of Central Park.
Oh, how delightful that must have been.
It-
You
it
were
was
really
it was
nice and
delightful.
warm painting such a cold scene.
Yeah, I don't know that I could do it any other way. Yeah.
Now we have here, what is this then that we're looking at, the Tibetan Museum?
Yes, in Staten Island, New York, there's the only Tibetan museum outside of Tibet. It houses a beautiful collection of thangkas and sculptures, and the architecture of the building is a genuine Tibetan architecture.
Now, were the pieces or brought here from
Yes,
Tibet and
yes.
actually
The
assembled
woman
on
who
Staten Island?
Yes, the woman who, Edna Klauber, the woman who founded the museum, her grandfather was an Asian art dealer, and she became the first female Asian art dealer in New York. So she made some groundbreaking history aside from creating that museum. That was her,
Oh, that's wonderful.
her child.
And I think that we have, now you've done a lot of traveling. Did you at one point
have, yes.
meet the Dalai Lama?
Well, yes, it's an interesting tale. I was on Staten Island in a section called Snug Harbor. I met a monk who was, I didn't know it at the time, but he was very close with the Dalai Lama. We became friendly, and in a few months' time, he said, I'm putting together a trip to go to India. I would like for you to go. And I thought, I don't know if I... And then he said, I know the Dalai Lama. It was life-altering. It really was,
I'm
because
sure.
there's so many different facets. And then to meet His Holiness,
Yeah,
and I gave him a reproduction of the painting.
Oh,
so.
that was very nice. That was very nice.
Yeah.
And you have done another one that's into the garden, into the White Garden? which
This is the place where I met the Tibetan monk. Not in this particular place, but in the on the grounds of Snug Harbor in Staten Island. It's a beautiful consortium of buildings, and it's very bucolic. And if you need a little respite from New York, I encourage you to go out there, because you really do
what
feel
is-
like
yeah.
you're someplace
Now,
else.
The last one that I think we're going to see, the Archway,
The
which
Archway,
is,
yeah.
Central Park, through the Archway.
Through the Archway was done just a few years ago. I was meandering through the park, and there's this incredible waterfall. So while I'm doing the painting, there's this rhythmic sound of water. And of course, New York being New York, it has ambient sounds other than the water.
It has its own rhythm,
Right.
without a doubt.
Right.
Without a doubt.
But one of the
And-
reasons why I wanted to do this particular scene is that it could really be anywhere. It looks like an aqueduct, perhaps, or maybe in Europe or upstate.
Yeah. Well, now coming back though to New York and in Central Park, Nelson and Tommy have written a book, and a lot of the things that you have in your book deal with Central Park as well. But what I'd like to know from you both is, how did you come to decide to write this book? I mean, it is a very interesting book. It really is. I really just was riveted to reading some sections of it, and I found it to be rather well written, and it flows, and it tells a very interesting story, which I understand is a true story.
Oh, it is.
But tell us, how did you come to write the book?
Well, towards the end of my career, the last year, 2004, I decided to write the story of all the people I met in the subway system. There were literally thousands of people that I had met.
And your career was?
New York City police officer. I was assigned to the Homeless Outreach Unit, the HOU.
Oh,
And my assignment was to meet with homeless people throughout the subway system.
just in the subways?
Well, it started off in the subway system, platforms and tunnels. I would walk through track areas, and then it expanded during the merge We went all 3 police departments merged in, and
Is this the housing department?
housing,
and,
city, and transit, and then that included parks anywhere in the city, abandoned buildings, and piers. During the course of those almost 20 years, I met thousands of people.
Oh, I imagine you did.
Homeless individuals. There was regular people who just had experience that caused them to become homeless. So I decided to write the story about some of these people that I had met. One of them had been Tommy, who I met before.
All right, I'd like to hear more about that, but before we get into that, for
Right.
you, Tommy and Nelson, how did you find the process of actually putting pen to paper? That's a very difficult process for a lot of people. I mean, it's like the first word, where do you start? And especially if you're working and collaborating with someone, how did you decide to work together on this?
Well, I started writing it, and halfway through the book, I knew that I couldn't finish this book without Tommy. Tommy was part of the story.
Oh, you started the book on your own
on my
originally?
own, right. So I went up to Tommy and I told him, I want you to be part of this book. You are the integral part of this book. And it took a while to convince him. Several years before Tommy agreed to do it. Yes.
Nelson and I worked together. When he was a cop with the Transit Authority working with the Homeless Outreach Unit, I was working for MTA Connections. And that was when we actually, MTA Connections,
Metropolitan Transit
Authority hired a team from the city to work homeless outreach on their property, all their areas, the subways, the terminals, Penn Station, Grand Central Station, Long Island Railroad, whatever, all their property. They needed a team. They wanted to get a team specific to them, where they used to let the other neighborhood outreach agencies work in their subway systems in those neighborhoods, but they didn't have any control over it. They didn't know what the numbers were, they couldn't really track the progress of the teams because they weren't working for them. So instead,
This is an individual nonprofit organization originally that started working with
actually, it was a city job. We worked for Health and Hospitals Corporation.
So
So we were city employees who had a contract with the Metropolitan Transportation Authority for this homeless outreach team. So Nelson and I started working together. And several months into working together, we realized that we had met before.
Interesting.
Because when I was homeless for 5 years. My story getting into that job was 5 years of homelessness from 1986 to 1991.
So now the name of your book is?
Oh, sorry. The name of the book is called Last Stop, A Survivor's Story.
Because I was wondering when I read the title, what was the significance of the title and the last stop?
Last stop is actually the last stop on
The
any train.
E-train line?
Well, on E-train specifically, but on any line that ends at a last stop, that's where we will go. Because last stop, whoever didn't get off that train usually would be a homeless person who's sleeping on a train.
Or
Or it could be someone
somebody
else.
who just had too much to drink at Madison Square Garden or someplace.
End up 7 o'clock in the morning on the
But,
train. You're supposed to go home at 9 the night before and never made it.
Sure, but we will go from car to car and wake up people and interview them and find out who was homeless and who was just like you said. Maybe someone had a couple of drinks, somebody missed their stop, and that's hence the name Last Stop.
And also metaphorically speaking, I also thought it was metaphorically that for the homeless people, the subway was the last stop, as far as where they lived. This was it. This was their bottom.
Interesting.
So our job was to try not to make this the last stop for the homeless person, to try to get them back from living on the street into some kind of situation where they eventually get independent housing again and get off the subway and don't have to sleep in the trains or on the street. So,
or in the tunnels.
Yeah, or in the
which is something that I'd like to ask you about. But also, too, what I'm very interested in is, now you self-published this book.
Yes, we did.
How did you go about doing this? I mean, how did you find out about, on the internet?
Right, on the internet. I researched it on the internet since we were having a hard time getting it published conventional way, with getting an agent, getting a publisher to listen to us. So I saw this ad on the internet for self-publish. So I told Tommy, let's try this. Let's see how it works. And Tommy agreed to it, and we got it done somehow.
Now, how did you actually write the manuscript? I mean, you're both computer literate, I imagine, and so you sat down.
Tommy a little more than I am.
Aha.
And then we also had two authors writing one same story, different point of views.
Now, was this through the publishing company?
No,
that
this
they
was
were?
us. This was us.
Just us two.
You know, us two authors, being the two authors referring to, two gentlemen sitting at a table,
Right.
looking at a blank computer screen, and like you said, how to start the first thing. So
Right.
we figured, when we started formatting the book, we went to the beginning. It
Where
just
I
made sense
started.
to go to the beginning and
Right.
just tell the story from the beginning, where it started. And for us, it started, well, the prologue is when we first met in the work capacity. That's where we met this gentleman at the Atlantic Avenue subway. It was the first time I met Nelson when I was employed as an outreach worker. In the first chapter, we go back to Nelson's early
On
police
patrol,
career
train patrol.
and my homeless experiences, where we actually met then, but unbeknownst to me that we actually met before. I didn't learn I met him until many months working together that we had this I had the conversation about my homeless life to one of his sergeants. We were doing an outreach patrol together, and I was just telling his sergeant about my experiences, including one of the stations I lived at, and that was when Nelson recognized me.
You actually lived in a subway
Yeah, I
station?
lived in the 57 and 6 was my summer home for a while. My winter home was Central Park. Up in the gazebo and 6th Avenue was my summer home, and the subway was my winter home. So see,
It makes sense.
I bet you did. You probably met me when you were painting the gazebo. I was probably one of the guys sleeping in your shot. And
So you were
we have to keep-
outdoors in the winter,
no, outdoors in the summer and underground in the winter.
underground in the winter. And I mean, but this is a very heavily traveled station.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Where,
Well, at night, back in the 80s, there were so many homeless people in New York City. We were part of the skyline. So we were an acceptable part of New York City living at the time.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, yeah.
Nobody cared that there were homeless people sleeping in the subway until the morning rush hour. That was when Nelson would come in, or other officers from the nearby district would come in and wake everybody up. and make
well,
us all-
I think that we have some images actually
Right.
from your book of people who are the invisible society. I
Yeah.
call them really.
No, that's
Yeah,
correct.
it's a good name.
Because, I mean, you'll see people sleeping on the steps of a church.
Right.
And I think there's one in particular on Fifth Avenue in the 50s or
Yeah.
60s where a lot of
Yes,
St. Philip's, is
Central
it?
Presbyterian, I think it's called. Fifth Avenue and 55th Street.
And I know that part of one of the things that I read in your book, which I found very interesting, by the way, was that you would have difficulty getting people to go to shelters.
Yeah.
Why
public
is
shelters.
that?
At that time, they weren't safe.
Really?
Yeah, and because when you get to the images, you'll see, but the shelters are a large hodgepodge of people that just sleep in this one big room, and you don't know who you're sleeping next to. It's not somebody who you friended. You just thrown in this huge room with a whole bunch of different people. The screening process was very light. You don't know who next to you has a mental illness, who next to you has an alcohol problem, who next to you just came from Rikers 3 days ago. And he's back in the shelter system until maybe his next trip to Rikers. Who knows?
Oh,
You know, you don't know. You don't know who you're sleeping next to. Nelson and I were talking earlier that in the shelter, you would walk through the shelter and you would see people would have their shoes underneath the legs of the bed, so nobody could steal
somebody
your
would
shoes.
take their shoes.
Right,
Right,
yeah.
they
You
would
would
steal your
see
shoes.
rows and rows of these,
People would steal from other
Cots
people in
and-
shelters.
Now, you mentioned people coming from Rikers going into shelters, but I mean, what was the option for someone that you found that was homeless? Either they go to a program or they get arrested?
well, if they were in violation, there was a lot of rules and regs that, for New York City Transit subways. One of them being an outstretch, obstructing passenger flow, occupying more than one seat. And many of those were either summonsable or arrest. Going into the track area was trespassing. In the early 80s, we had a couple of thousand people south of West 4th Street in the tunnels.
Fascinating. Even with the trains and the third
Yeah,
rail
right.
and
Oh, there are
I
places
mean,
to
you-
sleep that are safe spaces
There were
in
a lot
between the
of
tracks.
abandoned rooms.
safe
I-
spaces.
Sure, I know them. I can tell you. I
They're
can show you a
called
few.
safe space because they're in between the tracks. That's what the track workers call them.
Like,
And
for
they would
example,
sleep
at
there.
57 and 6, if you go in the tunnel on the north end, the uptown side, you can go in just past the end of the platform, and then you have a squared off small room, which is the walls are about 3 foot high, and you can go
I
inside
remember you
there.
describing that in the book, and I found that to be fascinating because you'd never know that such a place
People will live
existed.
behind it, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, the thing is that you have such a fascinating story that you've told in the book. How do you market, and are you marketing this book? Do you get help from the publishing company?
A little bit.
Or do you have to do it yourself?
We do a lot
or-
of that on our own. We go out every chance we get to promote our book through local newspapers, internet radio interviews, and just contacting people in the business and talking about the book.
Ah.
And social media has been a big part for me to connect with people. I've been using Twitter. I have a Twitter page where people who I meet, and I stay focused on who I friend on Twitter.
Now,
focused to
you
publishing.
also, though, are a marathon runner. I would
Yeah.
imagine you must meet thousands of people in that capacity.
I have met
you
some
done the New York
people
City
over-
Marathon?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm training for this current one. I've done
Are
the New
you
York City Marathon
really?
like 11 times so far.
Amazing.
This will be number 12, New York City.
Oh, that is absolutely fascinating. Have we already looked at the images?
No, I haven't
that-
seen
Oh,
for my book.
because I know
already.
that we have some images of.
Here we go.
Just briefly describe what we're looking at. This
Just
is
a homeless. I used that image to open up for chapter 2, which is entitled Tommy's Homeless Experience, and I thought that by using the images, it would for the chapter it would kind of set you up as you're looking at it.
Right now.
This was when Nelson was working undercover as a homeless person in chapter 3.
Oh, in
had to work Long Island
Madison Square
Railroad.
Garden.
Yeah. Penn
actually,
Station,
there
right?
was a large population in Penn Station.
Yeah,
And the MTA police couldn't use their own cops, so I went undercover for 8 nights as a homeless
that must have
person.
been an interesting,
Just
fascinating
what it would look
experience
like
as
on
well.
going in
And
the morning and finding somebody sleeping on a subway car. That's how it would be.
this is
Just a person who we saw sleeping on a car, just took a picture.
fascinating,
and-
absolutely fascinating. I mean, now, how did you wake someone up like that? It'd have to be very
Well,
carefully.
Yeah,
usually,
don't touch anybody.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
touch.
Rule, don't touch.
Really?
I would
Tap
we would tap on the side on
With
the
your
wall.
radio or
with my
something?
radio, and I
Me, just
immediately
my-
identify
my
myself
knob.
as a police officer, and the first thing I would say, "Are you all right?"
Now, is this what the shelters?
That's what the shelters look like. Back in the 80s, that's
Right.
exactly what they look like. That would be a perfect example of Sumner House
Where would this
in Brooklyn.
be? Where?
In our armories that have been converted to shelters.
Oh.
That's the inside of an armory.
Oh, is it
Atlantic
really?
Avenue used to look like that.
Not the
Atlantic
Armory on 60th Street? Or,
No, the Armory on 60th Street has a shelter in there, but they use the upper floors.
And that's the
We use
tunnel.
dorms.
Now, is this the tunnel that
One
you
of
were
the tunnels,
talking
yeah.
about?
That's one of them.
Yeah, I took that picture. It's very narrow. There's really no space to walk. That's one of the tubes that leads into another borough. That might have been from Manhattan into Queens. So I managed to take the picture standing in a little nook that's a safe space that's separated every 10 feet apart. So I managed to take the picture before the train
Fascinating.
came in.
And in all the pictures, we convert them on a
And-
computer to look like sketches.
Yeah, the pictures.
That's
now,
me.
This is
That's
it
me.
really?
That's a picture of me walking in Central Park.
Were you
use
headed
that-
any place in particular?
I was
or the
actually near
gazebo?
just north of Sheep Meadow.
Uh-huh.
I was just near Sheep Meadow there, and to me it was just a day where I was walking and just taking it in and enjoying the moment, and it just seemed like the perfect picture for the chapter that it led into, because I was going through some work turmoil, and the book is a lot of inner conflict with me on whether or not I'm in the right place doing the right job, because my education didn't come from school, it came from life experience, and I'm working with a lot of other people who went to school for this job in my department, Nelson's police department.
Sometimes life experience is much
Supersede.
better.
Yeah.
Well, it worked for me. I was able to make a good
Yeah,
deal
because
of
I
it.
mean, what are you doing now? Aren't you an emergency medical technician?
I'm an EMT
Aren't
now, yeah. Emergency medical technician in New York City.
you? And what are you doing now? You're still working
No, I'm
with the...
retired, and I work over at
You're
New
too
York City
young to be
Transit.
retired.
Yeah, I work New York City Transit at the arbitration room as a security officer.
Oh, that is terrific. And what I'd like to do at this point is look at some more of your paintings and relate them to some of the places that the two of you have described as well. And I know that we have, what is this that we're looking at?
This is a typical, for me, something that's very synonymous with New York City, the water tower and the little cars in the background. And high-rises. With a little bit of greenery. So it was an all-in-one image for me, and it's done in watercolor. This is after a poem by W.B. Yeats called The Two Trees. It's a spot in Central Park that's right near the Mother Goose statue. It's above the band shell. And the
Someplace
image
that you're familiar with?
I'm familiar with the band shell, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right near 72nd Street.
right near 72nd Street, that is correct.
Now, I think you also have a poster of Washington Square Park.
This was done again from life down in Washington Square Park, and it was as much, it was more entertaining for me because there were street musicians and magicians and sword swallowers and
Comedians.
jugglers and comedians.
Yeah.
It was very difficult for me to stay focused to paint that.
Now, I know, and you like to do geometric shapes as
Right.
well.
Yeah. In the
which
winter
is-
time, I usually do my etching, figurative work, and then I do a series of small fruit paintings. This one's called Cardinal Numbers.
And I know that you have
Magic
one-
Squares, actually. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's very nice. And this is a building.
This
uptown?
reminded me of any place in either Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx. It's just one of those places where
And
you
what
can
is
just
this
identify
last one that
with.
we're looking at?
This is a place where I hope people would go. It's called the Conservatory Garden up on 105th Street. It's right across the street from the Museum of the City of New York. And it looks like Europe. It's three separate gardens.
Well, you're not going to believe it, but we are out of time. And I mean, you have just been just extraordinary guests.
Thank you.
And just, it's been so interesting to talk to you about the different aspects of experiencing New York City. And if we want to get information on your artwork, you have a website?
Please go to my website, www.trombettaart.com.
And for your book, what's your website?
www.laststopbook.com.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest this evening.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed so much talking to you.
pleasure.
And it's just been fascinating for me, and I'm sure for our viewers. And I'd also like to thank our director, who's also my son, Ed Middleton. Many thanks to our crew, John Brandstrom, Zuli Nazo. I always stumble over her name, but I'm sure she'll forgive me. And in fact, Maria Giorgio, who introduced me to